So I've always believed that this was going to be the last decade of the Chinese system. China supposedly has 1.4 billion people, and it is the most rapidly aging workforce in recorded history according to Chinese stats. But we now know that the Chinese have overestimated their population in the past by over 100 million people, and that's a lot worse than it sounds. China as a modern entity was really not founded until after the conclusion of the Cultural Revolution in the 1970s, specifically when Mao had his summit with Richard Nixon, and then following on the partnership between Jimmy Carter and Deng Xiaoping, who was Mao's successor. At that point, concrete started getting laid down and high-rises started going up, and that was the first time that the Chinese really had a meaningful record-keeping system in the 20th century. But where there are records, there is money, and how you completed your records determined who got the money. So specifically, the first time in the intake system for the Chinese Communist Party where the government really became fully aware of you as a person is when you entered primary school, typically at age 4 to 6. Well, for local governments, the number of kids you had in primary school determined your population and therefore your share of the national budget. So local government officials throughout the country had a vested interest in over-guessing or deliberately increasing and inflating the number of kids that they actually had. That means that the overestimation of numbers really didn't begin until 1980, and that all of the 100 million missing people in China are aged 40 and under. So you're talking the most important part of the workforce. You're talking about pretty much everyone who has kids. You're talking about where most of the private consumption happens. And this is now probably a third less than the Chinese thought initially. But it's that second piece, the childbearing years thing, that's the real hit. Because now there are not enough people in China aged 45 and under to even theoretically regenerate the population to a structure that would be more sustainable. So I've always believed that this was going to be the last decade of the Chinese system. It can happen faster. If you've been following my work, you know that when it comes to agriculture and energy and finance and government, there are other reasons to believe that this is the end. But those at least theoretically could benefit from reforms or shifts in policy. There's not a lot you can do about demographics when you no longer have enough people of childbearing age. Two big pieces of information. First of all, birth rates. In order to maintain your current population, a country needs a birth rate of roughly 2.1 children per woman. With the new data, China is now at 1.16, which is the lowest in their history and the second lowest in human history ever. That's on top of the fact that their biggest cities now have birth rates that are below 0.7, making it impossible for them to maintain their population at all unless they raid the countryside, and China has been raiding the countryside for the last 40 years, and there are now not a lot of people left to pull in. That means, just from this one statistic, China is already the fastest aging society in human history. The second big number is that China's population peaked last year, in fact, with the population dropping by about 800,000 people. The scary thing about both of these figures is that we know they're wrong. A couple years ago, the Chinese started releasing bits and pieces out of their 2020 decade census, and they came to the grudging and public admission that they had overcounted their population by in excess of 100 million people, with all of those missing millions having been born since the one-child policy was adopted 40 years ago. So we're talking about exclusively these 100 million people or so are people who would have been aged 40 or under, the folks who have the kids. You combine that with the birth rate information, and we are looking at the complete dissolution of the Chinese demography in a very short period of time. Because if you're losing a lot of people, or you've never had a lot of people under age 40, that suggests that the ability of the Chinese system to maintain a workforce and a tax base is dissolving before our eyes. And we've never seen a system any time in history that's been able to make it through this sort of transition without a massive, massive, massive change in the political and economic environment. And the possible changes the Chinese are about to experience are not what I would consider things that will make this work better. The problem is that the Chinese model, economic model, is completely dependent upon globalization and internationalization. This is a country that imports 75 to 80% of their oil. This is the world's largest importer of food. This is a country whose oil comes primarily from the Persian Gulf, which is no longer being patrolled by anyone with a navy. And this is a country whose economic model is utterly dependent upon the ability to import raw materials and tech and then export semi-finished and finished goods to other markets that are in a different hemisphere for the most part, or at least a different continent. None of this works unless everyone gets along, and China has seen its economic and political relations with every single trading partner bottom out, with the exception, of course, with the Russians, because there's a shared love of genocide there.
And the world imposes sanctions on China. How does that go?
Very ugly for the Chinese. So, say what you will about the Russian economy. It's corrupt, it's inefficient, it's not very high value add. But it's a massive producer and exporter of food and energy. You put the sanctions that are on the Russians on Beijing, and you get a deindustrialization collapse and a famine that kills 500 million people in under a year. And the Chinese know this. They can only push so hard. Also, you can make the argument that if the Russians succeed, they actually solve or at least address some of their problems. Even if the Chinese were able to capture Taiwan without firing a shot, it doesn't solve anything for them. They're still food importers, they're still dependent on the United States, they're still energy importers, and even if they take every single one of those semiconductor fab facilities intact, they don't know how to operate them because they can't operate their own. And their own are among the worst in the world, not the best. Now, the only reason, in my opinion, to be concerned about a Taiwan war is because Xi has so isolated himself that when one person is making all the decisions and that one person refuses to access information to make the decisions, strange stuff happens. He does not have normal information flows anymore. Like even at the height of the Trump administration, when Trump was basically isolated himself from the entire intelligence community, he was still getting the daily briefing. There was still information being put in front of him. But Xi is so isolated himself, he doesn't want to hear anything except for what he wants to hear. And since no one knows what the status of the conversation with the voices in his head in on any given day, no one wants to bring him anything unless they're ordered to.
How do we know this about him?
Because there's no one to listen to anymore. That's one of the fun things about Russia versus China right now is that the Russian information security is so poor that American intelligence is literally listening in on everything. But in China, we can hear into the office, but there are no conversations happening.
You know that I am not very bullish on China. It's facing not demographic collapse, it's far faster than that, just complete demographic dissolution and economic collapse that goes along with that within the decade, assuming that there are no other problems. The United States has put in a series of technological restrictions that basically kill the entire tech sector. Their energy sector is completely dependent upon the ability to access the Middle East, which is an area they can't reach and force. Their trade system and their economic structures and their employment structures are utterly dependent upon the U.S. Navy making it safe for their civilian vessels to hit the world over. They are arguably the most internationally exposed country in the world, and on top of that, their financial sector and their agricultural sectors are absolute messes, things that make Enron look really well run. This is a country that is not going to last a whole lot longer. And in that environment, the question is, how do the Chinese prepare for the economic and if they want to politically continue? To this point, their solution has been absolutely rabid, foaming at the mouth nationalism, convincing their people that it doesn't matter if you can feed your kids, it doesn't matter if you have your job, you're Han Chinese and Chairman Xi is your leader, and that's enough. And to that end, Chinese propaganda has gone from the aggressive to the absolutely hateful. The person who has probably played the biggest role from an international point of view in this is a guy by the name of Zajilan, who has been the spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And he is kind of the poster child for what the Chinese call warrior wolf diplomacy, which is an unapologetic, ultra-nationalist, very hate and invective-filled approach to dealing with the rest of the world.